What if the people who raised you built your entire life on a lie? Camille Dawson was cast out of her own family, branded a disgrace, and erased from the legacy she was born into. But when a buried letter and a long-lost journal resurface, she returns, not for revenge, but for truth. In a world of power, secrets, and betrayal, Camille fights to reclaim her name and rewrite the story they tried to silence. This is a tale of bloodlines twisted by greed, and a woman brave enough to expose it all. Watch her tear down the illusion, one truth at a time. The email arrived just past midnight. Its subject line innocuous. Event update. Dawson wedding. Camille Dawson opened it without much thought, expecting another vendor change or a request for final confirmation. Instead, the message was short, 2 lines. Due to limited capacity and Nathan's family sensitivities, we've decided to keep the ceremony very small. You'll receive a private link to join via live stream. Thanks for understanding. No salutation. No signature. Just a link, like she was a distant cousin. Not the woman funding half the wedding. She stared at the screen, her heart thudding in a rhythm that didn't quite feel like shock anymore, more like recognition, a realization settling into her bones that she had always been convenient, never cherished, always footing the bill, never part of the picture. The burnt scent of toast still lingered into the kitchen from breakfast she never finished that morning. The glow of her laptop cast soft blue shadows on the tiled backsplash as she sat alone, barefoot, in her modest Austin apartment. Her bank account had transferred $50,000, 0 cents less than 72 hours ago. Her final installment for venue upgrades, menu changes, and last-minute non-negotiables Marina had insisted on. Camille could still hear her sister's voice from the last call. "Just relax, Z. Stay in your lane, okay?" The 3rd time that week she'd said it. Camille had laughed quietly at the irony. Her lane had paid for the floral ceiling installation, the imported linens, even the parking validation. She scrolled back through the messages, receipts, payment logs, reminders. Her name appeared on every invoice. Camille S. Dawson. Not once had it appeared on any wedding webpage, credit line, or photo caption. She wasn't supposed to be visible, just useful. Her phone buzzed, a group chat ping. Marina had posted rehearsal brunch photos, 17 of them. Camille was in 2, blurry in one, cropped at the shoulder in the other. In both, her presence was more suggestion than person. "So grateful to everyone who made this moment so special," the caption read. Camille put the phone down. She moved to the back patio, cardigan wrapped tight around her shoulders. Spring air drifted over the bushes, quiet and warm. The old wicker chair creaked beneath her weight, the same one her father refinished years ago. The cushions were new, but she'd never replaced the frame. There was something honest about the way it groaned when someone sat down, like it didn't pretend to hold more than it could. The wind chimes Marina once mocked for being tacky rattled gently in the breeze. Camille smiled faintly. She liked them. They made noise even when no one was listening. From inside, the glow of the kitchen light spilled softly through the glass door. Her laptop screen had gone black. She didn't move to touch it. Instead, she whispered to no one. "I paid for this entire thing. Why do I feel like I should apologize for showing up?" The words hung in the air, unanswered. Back inside, she poured herself a glass of wine but didn't drink it. Instead, she returned to her desk, pulled up the budgeting spreadsheet. Row after row. Payments to Sabine Events, Delphine Catering, Encore Quartet. She rubbed her temples. A folder sat on the corner of her desktop. It was labeled receipts/just-in-case/. Camille opened it. Each document bore her name, some digital, others scanned. Proof that this wasn't an emotional outburst, but a documented erasure. "Catering supplies," explained. "Hey." She rubbed her temples. A folder sat on the corner of her desktop. It was labeled receipts/. Camille opened it. Each document bore her name, some digital, others scanned, proof that this wasn't an emotional outburst, but a documented erasure. She clicked on the final scheduled transfer. $41,000, 0 cents queued for release at 7:00 AI the next morning. She hovered over the cancel button, not out of hesitation, but out of finality. She was no longer looking for inclusion. She was issuing a statement. Without sound, she clicked cancel. The confirmation box appeared. Are you sure? This cannot be undone. Yes. The screen refreshed. The transaction was gone. Camille leaned back in her chair, breathing in silence that wasn't sad, but full, purposeful. Her phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Noreen Harper, her college friend turned confidant. Just 5 words. Foss, I need to tell you. Camille didn't open it right away, but she knew. Whatever came next wasn't the beginning of the wedding week. It was the end of her silence. The next morning, Camille didn't open her eyes to an alarm. The house was silent, the kind of heavy quiet that clings to early dawns. She lay still for a moment, eyes fixed on the ceiling fan, whirring softly above, before rising and moving through her apartment like someone tracing muscle memory. Coffee brewed in the background. She didn't drink it. Her appetite had fled the moment she clicked cancel. Instead, she sat back at her desk, the light from outside pale and washed in gray. The city was slowly waking. Somewhere below her window, a delivery truck rolled by. She pulled up the wedding folder again, flipping through receipts without really seeing them. Her mind was elsewhere. On that email, that link, that caption. She remembered every time she'd been cropped from a family photo, every thank you never said, every favor that became expectation. Her phone chimed. Noreen, again. I wasn't going to say anything, but I can't pretend anymore. Marina said, as long as Camille keeps paying, we're golden. Her exact words. Camille stared at the screen, not because she was shocked, but because she wasn't. She could picture her sister's face as she said it, casual and entitled, like it was obvious. She didn't reply. She didn't have to. Instead, she opened a new folder on her desktop and began moving copies of every vendor contract into it. Florist, decorator, cake designer, musicians. Each one bore her name on the signature line, Camille S. Dawson. She renamed the folder, Contingency. Then, slowly, methodically, she printed out each file. Page after page fed through the printer as the sun climbed higher over Austin. The smell of toner filled the room. Camille didn't stop until the folder was thick and heavy in her hands. She slid it into her leather bag, not for drama, not for proof, for clarity. By noon she was dressed. Slacks, button-up, flat shoes, professional, neutral. At the bank, Carlos Medina greeted her with a careful smile. Miss Dawson, he said. Everything okay? She nodded. I'd like to make a formal cancellation of all remaining wedding payments, and I need it documented. Carlos hesitated. There might be penalties for the timing. I understand, she said. Do it anyway. He began typing. The room was quiet except for the keyboard clicks. When he looked up again, his eyes softened. You know, he said, you don't owe me an explanation, but you seem different today. Camille offered the faintest smile. I am. When the paperwork was signed, she rose, shook his hand, and left. Outside, the Texas air had turned warm and dry. Her car keys felt heavier than usual in her palm. As she drove, her reflection stared back from the rearview mirror. Not defiant, not angry, resolved. Back home, she sat on the couch and opened her iPad. Out of habit, Instagram was still open. Marina's face filled the screen. Laughing, radiant, holding a necklace Camille had personally redesigned from their grandmother's old pendant. A gift Camille had funded, had commissioned, had written the card for. Yet the caption read, My future mother-in-law knows me so well. What a woman. No mention of Camille, not even a tag. The betrayal didn't feel sharp. It felt slow, like a bruise forming under the skin. Camille powered off the screen and placed it down. Later that night, she prepared a single overnight bag, 1 pair of flats, 3 tops, the contingency folder, a laptop. She double-checked her hotel reservation in Denver and scheduled a ride to the airport for Sunday morning. Before bed, she sat out on the patio again. The wind chimes tinkled softly. She didn't cry. She didn't rage. She simply stared into the night and felt herself returning to something she hadn't touched in years. A center. A knowing. They had made their choice. Now it was her turn. The bank was quiet when Camille walked in. Too quiet, like a waiting room before bad news. The kind of stillness that amplifies the sound of your own shoes. She didn't hesitate. She moved past the chairs, the potted ficus by the ATM, toward the glass office where Carlos Medina sat, always with the same calm, unreadable expression. He looked up, recognized her immediately, and stood. "Miss Dawson?" he said, offering a back so soon. Camille held up the manila folder in her hand. "I need to make it official." Carlos stepped aside, motioned for her to sit. She did. Neatly. No fidgeting, no preamble. She opened the folder and spread out the contracts, stamped, signed, annotated. "I'm revoking all final payments related to the Dawson-Winslow wedding. This includes event coordination, catering, decor, and transportation. I've highlighted the final installments." Carlos adjusted his glasses. "We can stop the transfers, of course, but with this close to the date, there will likely be vendor penalties." "I understand," Camille said evenly. "Let them collect from the client of record." Carlos blinked. "Which would be you." Camille reached into her bag and pulled out a slim envelope. "Not anymore. These are transfer of liability forms. Each vendor agreement includes a clause allowing the financial obligation to revert to the event host in the event of unilateral withdrawal." He opened the envelope, scanning the pages with increasing astonishment. "You've prepared all of this?" "Yes," she replied. "All I need is the timestamp and acknowledgement of cancellation from the institution." Carlos studied her. "If I may, this feels personal." "It was," she said. "It isn't anymore." He gave a small, respectful nod. "Understood." As he keyed in the cancellations, Camille sat still, her fingers interlaced in her lap. Outside the window, the sun peeked out from behind a drifting bank of clouds, casting long shadows onto the sidewalk. 15 minutes later, she left the bank with a stamped receipt and a strange sense of lightness. Not joy, not satisfaction, just air where weight used to be. Her phone buzzed as she stepped back into the car. "Nonin, meet me at Sweetleaf Cafe in 20?" Camille texted back a single word. "On my way." Sweetleaf had always been their neutral zone. Not too loud, not too familiar, and the iced lavender matcha was solid. When Camille arrived, Norine was already seated on the patio, sunglasses pushed into her curls, a half-finished croissant on the plate. Camille sat across from her. "So?" Norine exhaled. "I didn't want to get in the middle of this, Z, but I can't ignore what I heard." "You already told me what she said," Camille replied. "That as long as I keep paying, they're golden." Norine shook her head. That wasn't all. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a piece of paper folded twice. She slid it across the table. Camille opened it. It was a printed guest list, handwritten notes scribbled in Marina's handwriting. Camille's name had been circled. Next to it, "Move to virtual, avoids drama, too visible." Camille stared at the words for a long time. Longer than she thought she would, not because she didn't expect them, but because it confirmed that this wasn't an oversight. "I found that in Sabine's discard pile," Norine said softly. "She didn't mean to leave it out, but I saw it. Took a photo." Camille looked up. Her face was calm, but her hands had begun to tighten around the edges of the list. She made sure I was out of the pictures, she said, because if I'm not visible, I can't cast a shadow. Noreen's expression softened. You're not a threat, Camille. Camille let out a quiet laugh. To Marina, I've always been a threat, not by trying, just by being. They sat in silence for a moment, the clink of utensils and hum of conversation rising around them. You done? Noreen asked after a while. Camille looked out at the parking lot, at the rows of cars shimmering under the sun. I'm just getting started, she said. Back home, Camille opened her laptop and pulled up the folder she had renamed Contingency. It now contained subfolders labeled by vendor, florist, venue, cake, decor, and a final, titled simply Proof. Inside Proof, she had copied screenshots of emails, PDF receipts, text messages, even voicemail transcriptions. Each one was a timestamp in the story of her erasure, a breadcrumb trail of how you can fund a legacy without being part of it. She clicked through the images slowly, deliberately. A scanned invoice for $7,200.00 to Delphine Catering, with a note in Marina's email. We can just say it's covered by Dad's old account, right? Camille had covered that check, as she had all the others. Because we thought you didn't mind, was a phrase that had worked for years. This time, she minded. On her desk sat the physical binder she'd put together. Every page in a protective sleeve, not to show off, to preserve. She wasn't going to confront anyone with it, not yet, but the story needed to be intact when the time came. She reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out a box of stationery, the kind she used once a year when writing holiday notes to clients. She selected a cream-colored envelope, simple and weighty, and carefully wrote on the front in dark ink, Sabine Events, at coordinator in charge. Inside, she placed a brief letter. Effective immediately, all outstanding payments from Camille Dawson toward the Dawson-Winslow wedding are withdrawn and will not be reinstated. This decision is final. Please cease all event activities attributed to my account, Camille S. Dawson. She signed it, sealed it, and slid it into her bag. That evening, the sky in Austin shifted to a dusty gold. Camille stepped outside to the mailbox. She didn't usually walk. It was a short drive to the nearest drop-off. But today the walk felt intentional, a mile in quiet, letting her thoughts organize themselves. She passed the Jacksons' home, where kids screamed from an inflatable pool, past the retired vet with the prosthetic leg who waved from his porch as always. He reminded her that the world didn't stop turning just because someone tried to erase you. The sun would still set, the kids would still laugh, and Camille Dawson could still walk to a mailbox with her head high. She mailed the envelope at 6:49 p.m. By 7:15 she was home again, sitting with a glass of water, not wine. The printer whirred as she printed one final copy of her cancellation letter. She added it to the proof folder and locked the file with a password. It wasn't paranoia, it was precision. The air was heavy with the kind of tension that doesn't come from rage, but from years of being quiet. She thought of her mother's voice. Don't ruin this for your sister. And how often Camille had been told that what she felt didn't matter, so long as everyone else looked happy. That narrative was done now. Her phone buzzed just as she closed her laptop. It was Marina. A text, nothing else. Hey, quick cue, do you remember which florist you used for the engagement dinner? Sabine misplaced the invoice. Camille stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then she typed, You'll have to ask the person paying for it. She hit send and turned off her phone. Later that night, as the sky darkened to indigo, Camille stood by her kitchen sink, washing a single wine glass she never used. She dried it carefully, placed it back in the cabinet, and paused. For the first time in years, she felt the edges of her own story, not the one told about her, the one she was finally ready to write. The hotel lobby was dressed like a magazine spread. Everything gleamed, Polished marble floors, towering floral arrangements in crystal vases, strings of gold foil letters that spelled M and N forever. Camille stood just inside the entrance, clutching her small clutch bag with one hand, the other lightly brushing the pearl studs at her ears. She wore a dove-gray dress, elegant, understated, appropriate. Nothing flashy, nothing that might be mistaken for trying to compete. A sign on a golden easel caught her eye. "Welcome to Marina and Nathan's rehearsal dinner, Grand Ballroom, Level 2. Below it, a thick sheet of printed acknowledgments listed special thanks to our families, friends, and the planning team at Sabine Events. Camille read every name. Hers wasn't on it. She paused beside the easel, adjusting the strap of her bag, masking the tremor in her breath. Behind her, guests filtered in, all smiles and sequins, the kind of ease that comes with being wanted. Camille turned away, past the concierge desk toward the elevator banks. A hotel staffer approached her with a practiced smile and handed her a folded card. "Place card for your table," he said, then added, "Table 14, just near the staff hallway." She didn't flinch, just nodded. The elevator ride was brief. The doors opened to a golden foyer humming with laughter and soft jazz. The ballroom was exactly as she'd helped fund. Tall ivory columns, glass chandeliers, and custom-printed menus tucked into gold-rimmed plates. Camille scanned the room. Marina stood near the head table, glowing in a champagne dress, arm looped through Nathan's. Photographers hovered nearby like bees to honey. Camille's table was in the farthest corner of the room, nestled between the restrooms and a stack of unused high chairs. Her name card had been printed in a smaller font than the others. She noticed. She sat. To her left was a cousin she hadn't spoken to since high school. To her right, a woman she didn't recognize leaned over and asked, "You're the sister, right?" Camille offered a polite smile. "I am." "Oh, I thought maybe you were part of the design team." "The color palette, your dress, it's so on theme." Camille's smile held. She didn't bother to correct her. Across the room, Marina raised her glass. The cameras clicked in unison as Nathan kissed her temple. Guests clapped. Camille didn't. The meal arrived, perfectly plated salad, a delicate roast. Camille barely touched hers. Every so often, the restroom door swung open behind her, releasing a puff of citrus-scented cleaner. The proximity wasn't subtle, it was pointed, deliberate. She sat still, posture straight, watching her family move from table to table, greeting, laughing, performing. Not once did anyone approach her. When dessert was announced, Camille folded her napkin slowly and placed it on the table. She leaned toward the cousin beside her. "Long day," she whispered. "I'm heading out." The cousin nodded, already scrolling through her phone. Camille rose and walked quietly through the ballroom. No one stopped her. No one noticed. The valet brought her car around within 3 minutes. She thanked him, tipped generously, and slid into the driver's seat. She didn't start the engine right away. Instead, she sat with her hands on the steering wheel, watching the hotel lights glow in the side mirrors. She picked up her phone, opened a new message to Marina. "Hey, I noticed I wasn't credited anywhere. My seat was by the restroom." She stared at it, then deleted it. Typed again, "Are we okay?" Then erased that too. The screen returned to blank. Camille looked at her reflection in the dark glass. Her eyes looked tired. Not the evenings, but from the years. The quiet years. The ones she'd spent writing polite little sentences to people who didn't notice they were cutting her to pieces. She closed the phone and placed it in her lap. A single thought emerged. Clear, solid, steady. No more soft entries. Camille's apartment was dim when she returned. Just the soft glow from the hallway light spilling into the front room. She didn't turn on the overheads. She didn't need them. She knew every corner of this place by heart. The spot on the floor where the tile creaked, the slight stick of the sliding door to the balcony, She slipped off her heels, leaving them by the couch, and walked straight to her desk. The leather bag she'd carried to the dinner was already unzipped. From it, she pulled the manila folder labeled contingency. She laid it flat, opened the flap, and stared at the first page. Her name, bold, centered, over and over again. Vendor after vendor. She sat, back straight, and began assembling what needed to happen next. The wedding was 2 days away. The remaining vendors, all of them contracted under her name, would be waiting for final approval, final instructions, final confirmation of service. She had timed everything. The cancellation letters were already drafted. She would deliver them one by one and not electronically, not by email that could be ignored or spun into miscommunication. These would arrive in person, hand-delivered or couriered, time-stamped and binding. Camille printed the letters slowly, feeding the heavy ivory stock into the tray with care. Each page slid out clean, the words black and precise. She slipped them into matching envelopes, sealing each with a short line handwritten beneath her signature. This action is final and will not be reversed. The last letter she placed into a special envelope, marked in clean print, Sabina Vence, SAD, at coordination lead. She held that one longer, then placed it on top of the stack. She wasn't angry, not in the traditional, fire in the veins kind of way. It was colder than that, controlled, like ice forming over the surface of a lake, soundless, inevitable. She remembered Marina's text earlier that week. "Don't worry, we'll keep things smooth and drama-free. Hope you understand. Don't take it the wrong way. LOL." Camille hadn't responded, because there was nothing left to say. Now she finally understood what her silence had cost her. Not just place cards and seating arrangements, but dignity, presence, the right to belong in a family without having to pay admission. She moved to the window. From the 15th floor, downtown Austin, glimmered, refined, disinterested. She stood there a while, one hand resting against the cool glass, her reflection faint but steady. She remembered another dinner, 6 years ago, a small celebration at Marina's old apartment. Camille had just won the Rising Star Award at her firm, a big deal in their industry. She'd brought the plaque with her, still in its velvet case, hopeful, maybe a little proud. But when she handed it to her mother to show, Virginia barely glanced at it. "That's nice," she said. "Is Marina moving in with Nathan yet?" Camille had smiled, tucked the award under her arm, and offered to open the wine. She never displayed that plaque. It still sat in the back of her hallway closet. Now as she walked to that very closet, opened it, and pulled out the case. She opened it, held the plaque in both hands, then walked to the kitchen, set it on the counter, and stared at it under the overhead light. Not because it needed to be honored, but because she did. Her phone buzzed. It was Norine. "Just got wind that Sabine thinks you're still covering the final setup fees. Want me to say anything?" Camille typed back, "No, let her assume what she wants. She'll find out soon enough." It was nearly midnight when Camille finally turned off the lights, crawled into bed, and lay still beneath the linen sheets. The city murmured outside her window, horns, engines, laughter drifting up from a bar across the street. She didn't check her phone again. Instead, she reached for the notebook beside her bed, flipped to a blank page, and wrote just 2 words in block letters: "No more." She capped the pen, closed the book, and lay back. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't be invisible for it. The morning of the wedding broke with a brittle kind of stillness. Sunlight without warmth, quiet without peace. Camille parked 2 blocks from the venue. She didn't want to be seen yet, not until it mattered. She stood for a moment beside her car, the Texas heat already thick in the air. From this distance, the Whitmore estate looked like something out of a movie, an ivy-covered mansion, surrounded by manicured lawns, its circular driveway already lined with valet attendants and luxury cars. White tents unfurled across the back lawn, hiding the altar. A string quartet tuned up somewhere beyond the hedges. Camille slipped her sunglasses on, grabbed the slim holder from the passenger seat, and began walking. The housekeeper, Marta, still loyal after all these years, answered the side door. She gasped softly when she saw Camille. "Miss Camille," she said, pulling her inside. "They don't know you're coming, do they?" "No," Camille said. "And don't warn them. I won't be long." The interior of the house smelled of fresh flowers and polished wood. Upstairs, someone was laughing, probably one of Marina. Camille didn't look up. She moved down the hall, passing old family portraits. There, frozen in time, was an image of them at ages 10 and 12. Marina in a pink dress, Camille in navy. Both smiling, but only one of those smiles had been real. She entered the study and shut the door behind her. It was unchanged. Dark mahogany shelves, rows of leather-bound books, a single oil painting above the fireplace. On the desk, the wedding coordination binder lay open, full of schedules, contracts, vendor lists. She placed the folder she'd brought squarely on top of it. Then she sat and waited. It didn't take long. Virginia burst in 10 minutes later, Marina right behind her, both still in robes, half done with makeup. "What the hell is this?" Virginia snapped, waving a cancellation notice. Camille stood, calm, measured. "Final confirmation letters," she said. "Vendors, florist, catering, lighting, all booked through me, all canceled as of 8 a.m. Marina paled. "You're joking." Camille tilted her head. "You told me not to take things personally, remember? I took that to heart." "You can't do this," Virginia hissed. "This is sabotage." "No," Camille said. "This is closure." Nathan entered the room behind them, confused. "What's going on?" Camille turned to him. "I suggest you check with Sabine Events. They'll tell you there's no licensed coordinator on site anymore. Also, the photographer walked when I pulled the licensing release." Nathan blinked. "What? But—" "I paid for everything," Camille said flatly. "Down to the monogrammed napkins. And now I've paid to undo it." Virginia stepped forward. "We will sue you for this." Camille smiled, cold, quiet. "Be my guest. But first, you'll have to explain to a judge why your daughter asked me to remain silent. Foot the bill and sit beside the restrooms as if I were nothing." Marina's voice cracked. "I just didn't want drama today." Camille nodded slowly. "And now, ironically, that's all you have." No one spoke. Somewhere down the hall, the quartet began playing. The music filtered into the study like a cruel joke. Camille reached for her bag, slung it over her shoulder, and walked toward the door. She paused in the doorway. "Tell the guests the wedding's postponed. Or don't. I don't care." "Camille, wait!" Marina called after her. But Camille didn't stop. Not this time. Camille stepped out into the midday sun, the silence behind her ringing louder than any applause ever could. She didn't glance back at the house, didn't flinch at the hurried voices beginning to rise behind the walls. Marina shouting, Virginia dialing someone with frantic precision. Let them scramble, let them feel, for once, the loss of control she'd been swallowing since she was 19. She walked down the long driveway with unshakable calm, her heels clicking on the stone like punctuation marks in a speech only she understood. Each step was deliberate, each breath earned. At the corner of the street, parked under the shadow of an elm, Noreen leaned against her car, arms crossed, eyes watchful. She straightened as Camille approached. "You actually did it," Noreen said, a low whistle escaping her lips. "You really burned the whole thing down." Camille answered right away. She just handed her the envelope, thick, sealed, marked for Sabine Events. "Final delivery?" Noreen asked. Camille nodded. "They'll be looking for someone to blame. Might as well give them the truth. They got into the car. Camille slid into the passenger seat and shut the door quietly. Her hands were steady now. No tremors, no doubts, just stillness. Like a lake after a storm. As Noreen pulled away from the estate, Camille stared out the window. Guests in pastel dresses and tailored suits were arriving in waves, confusion beginning to ripple through the crowd. An older man turned toward the house, then toward the valet, his brow furrowed. No one had told them yet. Camille felt guilt. These were the same people who 2 years ago had stepped around her at her father's memorial, offering her polite nods as if she were the distant cousin who came out of obligation. No one had asked where she'd been living. No one had noticed the empty seat reserved for family but never filled. "I sent the press release to 3 outlets," Noreen said, cutting into her thoughts. "Just a brief statement. Anonymous source." Headline reads, "Heiress's wedding canceled due to internal dispute. No names." Camille looked at her. "Thank you." Noreen hesitated. "They'll spin this, you know. Marina will say it was a scheduling issue. Virginia will claim you misunderstood some agreement. They'll frame you as bitter. Vindictive." Camille gave a small shrug. "Let them. The truth isn't a popularity contest." Noreen smiled grimly. "You've changed." "No," Camille replied. "I just stopped pretending." They drove in silence for a while, until Noreen pulled into the parking lot of a small, tucked-away diner near South Congress. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of strong coffee and cinnamon toast. They found a booth in the corner, out of sight, out of reach. Camille pulled out her notebook, the same one she'd used during law school, now repurposed. On the next page, beneath yesterday's "no more," she wrote 2 new words, Phase 2. Noreen raised an eyebrow. "There's more?" Camille nodded. "You were right. The wedding was just the surface. There's something else, something deeper. When I was in the study earlier, I saw a document tucked into the back of the coordination binder. A different letterhead. It wasn't from any vendor I'd worked with." Noreen leaned forward. "What kind of document?" "I only caught the header. Texas probate filing, preliminary amendment." Noreen's eyes widened. "That's not wedding related." "That's estate related." "Exactly," Camille said. "And it was dated just last week." She flipped her notebook to a clean page and began sketching out a timeline. "There's a reason they kept me out of this wedding. There's a reason they wanted me to stay invisible. I don't think it was just about embarrassment. I think something changed in the trust." Noreen whistled again. "You think Virginia amended the inheritance?" "I think she did it quietly, while everyone was distracted by flower arrangements." Camille closed the notebook, her expression set. "If they thought the wedding was a war," she said, "they're not ready for what comes next." She reached for her coffee, took a sip, and smiled. The kind of smile that doesn't ask for permission. The kind that promised this was far from over. The law office of Ballinger, Knox & Tate sat like a concrete fortress in downtown Austin, uninspired, unmovable, and thoroughly unimpressed with sentiment. Camille had always hated it. The leather chairs in the lobby were too stiff. The air smelled like varnish and paper cuts, and everyone spoke in hushed, omnipotent tones. But today, as she pushed open the glass doors and stepped inside, she wasn't afraid. She was ready. "Camille Dawson, here to see Mr. Ballinger," she told the receptionist, her voice clear. The young woman tapped a few keys, hesitated slightly, probably recognizing the last name, and nodded. "He'll be with you shortly? Please, take a seat." She didn't. She walked to the window and stared out over the city. The skyline looked different from up here. Less vibrant, more calculated, like everything she was about to walk into. Minutes later, a door clicked open behind her. "Camille, been a while." She turned. There was Charles Ballinger, tall in his 60s, a silver tie to match his silver hair, the same man who'd managed her father's estate, who used to pat her head when she was a girl and tell her that contracts were just grown-up promises. "Mr. Ballinger," she said evenly, "I'd like to talk about the changes made to Franklin Dawson's trust." His smile faltered, just slightly. "Let's go to my office." Inside, the room was lined with law books that looked more decorative than functional. He gestured toward a seat, but Camille remained standing. "I won't waste your time. I saw a probate filing with your firm's header, amending my father's original estate plans. I wasn't informed. I'd like to know why." Ballinger sat, his fingers steepled. "Camille, I'm afraid I can't discuss active documents without the consent of all relevant beneficiaries." She leaned forward. "You mean Virginia?" A pause, just long enough to confirm her suspicion. "You know," she continued, voice low, "it's funny. My father's original will named me as a co-executor. Any amendment should have triggered a notification. Instead, I've been left in the dark while my stepmother quietly maneuvers assets like she's playing chess." Ballinger shifted. "Virginia has been proactive, but legally speaking, she had the authority under specific clauses, and if you're looking to contest—" "I'm not contesting yet," Camille cut in. "I'm investigating." She reached into her bag and slid a manila envelope across the desk. Inside, a notarized letter from the family's former estate manager, confirming discrepancies in asset distribution. A copy of her father's original letter, left unread at his funeral. And finally, a list of transactions made within 6 months of his death, one of which involved a property transfer to Marina, forged with a signature that no handwriting expert would dare validate. Ballinger looked down at the envelope, his lips pressed together. "Virginia has gone too far," Camille said. "And if she's hiding something in that amendment, I'm going to find it." "You do realize," Ballinger said slowly, "that if you open this door, there's no going back. It will become public, messy, and painful." Camille smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Painful already happened. Public is just a matter of timing. She stood and walked out without waiting for dismissal. As the door shut behind her, she felt a rush of something she hadn't felt in years. Power. Not the kind inherited, but earned. Built one truth at a time. Downstairs, Noreen was waiting with a folder tucked under her arm. "I found the old house deed," she said as they walked toward the car. "It was never supposed to leave the family until both children turned 30. "Children?" Camille echoed, plural. "That includes me." "And yet," Noreen added, 3 months after your father's death, Virginia transferred it to Marina, cash-free, no probate." Camille opened the folder, eyes scanning the deed. "I want to reopen the estate case," she said. "And I want that amendment." Noreen nodded. "Then we go through the court. Then we go through fire," Camille corrected, her jaw set. "Because I'm done letting other people write my story." The courtroom was nothing like Camille remembered from her mock trial days in high school. It wasn't glamorous or theatrical. It was cold, plain, a place where the truth wasn't shouted, it was dragged into the light, inch by inch, document by document. Camille sat behind the plaintiff's table, Noreen beside her, flipping through the file marked Estate of Franklin Dawson. Across the aisle, Virginia wore a pale lilac suit and a look of injured dignity. Marina was beside her, chewing on the edge of a pen and trying to appear innocent. Neither of them acknowledged Camille. Judge Harriman entered. "We're here today to consider a motion filed by Ms. Camille Dawson regarding the probate amendment to the estate of Franklin Dawson, deceased." The room quieted. Ballinger stood. "Your Honor, we believe this motion is frivolous and unnecessarily inflammatory." "All legal procedures were followed?" Noreen rose next. "Your Honor, with respect, we believe those procedures were manipulated. We request a formal review of the amendment's authenticity and the sequence of transfers made within 90 days of Mr. Dawson's death." Judge Harriman nodded. "Proceed." Camel's palms were sweating, but her voice didn't waver. The amendment removed me as a beneficiary and reassigned several assets without my knowledge or required consent, including the Austin property that, per the original will, was meant to stay in the family until both children reached the age of 30. She paused, looking straight at Virginia. My father trusted this family would honor his wishes. He was wrong. Virginia leaned in, whispering something to her attorney. Camille ignored it. Noreen continued, "We also have evidence that the signature on the amendment does not match verified samples of Mr. Dawson's handwriting. Additionally, there are email logs showing communication between Virginia Dawson and a handwriting specialist 3 weeks before the amendment was signed." Ballinger shifted in his seat. The judge adjusted her glasses. "That is a serious accusation. Do you have the forensic report?" "We do," Noreen replied, handing the folder to the bailiff. Camille's heartbeat thundered as the report was passed up to the bench. Every second stretched, her father's voice echoing in her mind. "Take care of what's real, Camille, not just what's written." Judge Harriman scanned the documents, then looked up. "This merits further review. I'm ordering a handwriting analysis from a court-appointed expert. In the meantime, I'm placing a temporary freeze on all estate assets transferred posthumously." Virginia's gasp was audible. Marina went pale. Outside, reporters waited. Camille ignored the cameras and microphones. She walked straight to the fountain at the center of the courthouse square, sat on its edge, and let herself breathe. Noreen sat beside her. "That went better than expected." Camille shook her head. "That was just the first punch, Virginia. Don't go down without dragging the whole house with her." Noreen reached into her coat. "Then maybe this helps." She handed Camille a small flash drive. "What is it?" "Something I got from an old friend at County Records. It's a digitized voicemail, left on Franklin's landline the day before he died. Marked as deleted but recovered in a backup." Camille plugged it into her laptop. The voice was muffled at first, then clear. "Franklin, it's Charles. I don't think we should move forward with the amendment. Something doesn't feel right. Virginia's pushing this too fast. Call me back." Camille closed the laptop. Everything she needed was finally in her hands. Not just a legal case, a weapon. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the courthouse lawn. "She was desperate," Camille murmured. "That's when people make mistakes." Noreen nodded. "And that's when you get your shot." Camille stood. "Let's prep for the next hearing. I want everything ready. Witness lists, forensic charts, hell, even Charles Ballinger if we have to drag him in." "You really think he'll turn?" Camille looked back toward the courthouse. "You already did." "The day he hesitated." She paused, her voice firm now. "It's only a matter of time before the rest of them follow." And with that, she walked away. Not for the first time, but this time with power, clarity, and the truth on her side. It was strange how silence could be louder than any scream. Camille stood in the front foyer of the Dawson estate, the same house where she'd once memorized piano scales under her mother's watchful gaze, where she'd begged for permission to go to prom, where she'd first learned how to lie just to survive. Now it felt hollow. Not because it was empty. Virginia and Marina were both upstairs, voices muffled behind closed doors, but because the illusion had finally cracked. She held the envelope in her hand, sealed with the Franklin Dawson Foundation crest. Inside, the final piece. The posthumous letter her father had written to his attorney, instructing that it only be delivered in the event of a probate dispute. It was dated 2 weeks before his stroke. His handwriting, definitive, unmistakable. Camille had read it 5 times already, but each time felt like the first. "If this reaches you, it means my wishes have been violated. Camille is to receive full oversight of my estate, including access to sealed records pertaining to Eleanor's medical files and the 1992 trust revision. I have reason to believe certain individuals may attempt to override these terms for personal gain. I trust my daughter to make the truth known, regardless of consequence." She tucked it into her coat as footsteps echoed down the stairs. Marina appeared, her lips tight, eyes red from what Camille suspected was a half-hearted attempt at crying. "Are you proud of yourself?" Marina hissed. "Dragging us through court like this? Making Dad out to be some weak old fool?" Camille didn't flinch. He wasn't weak, but he was surrounded by cowards. Virginia followed behind, slower, her face drawn tight with something between fury and fear. She no longer carried herself with the same effortless control. Her pearls looked heavier, her heels more uncertain. "You always wanted to play the victim, Camille," Virginia said flatly, "even as a child. But this performance? It's gone too far." Camille held out the letter. "This isn't a performance, it's the truth. You've spent decades covering your tracks, hiding Eleanor's records, cutting off people who remembered differently. But you forgot something." "What?" Virginia sneered. "I was there," Camille replied, voice calm. "I remember the bruises, the shouting. I remember Eleanor crying in the guest room after you forced her to lie about the trust. I remember Charles yelling that night before the amendment was signed." Virginia reached for the letter, but Camille pulled it back. "This doesn't go to you," she said. "It goes to the board, and the press, and maybe even to law enforcement, depending on how this plays out." "You wouldn't dare," Marina spat. Camille stepped forward. "I already have." She walked past them, down the hallway to the study. The room still smelled faintly of tobacco and cedar. On the desk sat her father's journal, unlocked now after weeks of legal battles. She opened to the last page. "The greatest lie we tell is that blood makes a family. It doesn't. Character does." She closed the journal and placed it into her bag. The study, the house, the cold walls, they could keep their ghosts. Outside, the sun had begun to set, casting amber light through the foyer's stained-glass window. Camille turned one last time. "You made me feel like an outsider in my own home," she said. "But now I realize it was never mine to begin with, and that's okay." "I don't need it." Virginia stepped forward, voice cracking. "What do you want, Camille?" Camille looked at her, really looked, past the perfectly coiffed hair and the power suits, into the hollow desperation of a woman who built an empire on secrets. "I want peace," Camille said, "and that starts by leaving everything behind that ever tried to break me." She opened the door. A wind swept through the hall, and with one final glance, Camille walked out, leaving behind not just the estate but every lie it had ever tried to preserve. The courthouse was quiet after the verdict. The courthouse had faded, and the last of the curious onlookers had trickled out. Camille sat alone on the wide stone steps outside, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She stared out across the street as dusk folded into night, her fingers gently curled around the USB drive that had unraveled it all. Inside that tiny piece of plastic, files from the Dawson Foundation's hidden archive, a hidden folder on her father's personal hard drive labeled only truth, emails between Virginia and the hospital administrator, scans of Eleanor's original will, audio clips, short but damning, of Charles ordering a revision to the family trust while Eleanor was under heavy sedation, and most painfully, a video Eleanor had recorded just 2 days before she died. Frail, pale, but lucid. "Camille, if you're seeing this, then they've done it. They've taken everything. I didn't have the strength to stop them, but you might. You always had fire in you, and you're more like me than you think." Camille had played that video every night for a week. It wasn't just proof. It was a lifeline. For years she had doubted the version of her memories that no one wanted to validate, but now, the silence had been shattered. The court had ruled in her favor. The Dawson Foundation's assets were frozen pending full investigation, Virginia's attempt to claim full control had failed. Marina had been ordered to return the misallocated funds she'd funneled into a shell company, but none of it felt like triumph. Not really. "Camille?" The voice was familiar, hesitant. She looked up. Julian stood a few feet away, hands in the pockets of his coat, face unreadable under the streetlight. She hadn't seen him since the hearing. "I thought you'd be gone already," she said softly. "I almost was," he replied. "But I figured you shouldn't be alone tonight." Camille allowed a small, tired smile. "Funny. I've been alone for most of my life. Didn't realize it until I stopped needing to explain why." Julian sat beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The night buzzed gently around them. Crickets, distant traffic, the occasional bark of a dog. "I read Eleanor's letter," Julian finally said, "the one you submitted this morning. It broke me." Camille nodded. She never got to be heard. Not in that house. Not in that life. But today, she was. He turned to her. "And you? What now?" She hesitated. "I'm not staying here. This city, it's full of shadows. I've spent too long chasing ghosts. Maybe it's time to live." Julian tilted his head. "Any idea where you'll go?" She looked across the street, where a woman and her daughter walked hand in hand beneath the glow of a diner's neon sign. There was something achingly tender about it, so ordinary, so untainted. "Denver," Camille said after a beat. "I hear they have clean air and people who don't ask about your last name first." He laughed gently. "Sounds like a start." Camille stood, brushing the folds of her coat. "I'm not running anymore, Julian. But I'm also not staying to fix people who never saw me as family. I've given them enough." "And if they come after you?" he asked. He glanced down at the USB. "They won't. Not unless they want every media outlet from here to New York calling them by morning." He stood with her. "Then, I guess this is goodbye?" Camille hesitated. "For now." She took a deep breath, then handed him a copy of the USB, just in case. As she turned and walked toward the sidewalk, the courthouse behind her bathed in gold from the exterior lights, Camille felt something she hadn't known in years. Lightness, not victory, not revenge, just release. Somewhere behind her, the old Dawson legacy was crumbling, but ahead, in the distance, was something she'd never thought she'd earn. A future that didn't begin with someone else's name. And as she disappeared into the night, the wind carried her whisper, soft, certain, and finally free. "I am not what they made me. I am what I choose next." Thank you for watching this story of betrayal, truth, and liberation. Camille's journey reminds us that sometimes walking away is the most powerful act of healing. Family doesn't end in blood. It begins where honesty lives. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that uncover the strength hidden in silence. Until next time, choose truth. Always.